The Waves of Tech is the down-to-earth tech podcast for you, your family, and your friends. We remove all the complicated, drawn-out explanations of technology and simply talk about how technology is influencing every element of our lives, from social media and the cloud to tweeting and mobile communication. We talk tech in a different way. So plug in your devices and listen as we get ready to ride the Waves of Tech.
On episode 430 of The Waves of Tech, does a talent gap exist? National Geographic TV series, HTTPS status expires on several government sites, and missing Google Drive photos. The Waves of Tech is powered by modernlife.network, modern issues, modern discussions. Well, Steve, how's it going today, man?
Well, I'm doing very well. It is Martin Luther King national holiday here in the United States, so I know a lot of people are off for the celebration of Dr. King's birthday. I'm not, however, since I'm self-employed. However, we did find time to have another episode of The Waves of Tech.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're happy to be back. Thank you, everybody, for coming back. If you guys have been enjoying the podcast, we appreciate any ratings or reviews, social media shout-outs, word of mouth, plugs through any of the apps of choice and whoever you may be working with. So appreciate all of our new listeners that we've been getting on board. And we hope that, well, Steve, I know we have a really good show lined up for episode 430. Well, let's just kick this off right away. And I found a really good article on cdnet.com, which we don't talk too much about what CDNet reports. They do have a lot of really good information out there, but one really caught my eye. And the title was 2 in 5 technology job applicants don't have the right technical chops. And this is according to a recent survey. And according to the survey, the talent gap, it's a tech talent gap, is biting most of the 1,000 technical hiring managers kind of in the rear at this point. And so again, more than 2 in 5 candidates, that's 43%, that are applying for most of the technology and engineering positions that we've talked about lately on this podcast, are lacking the appropriate technical skills for those roles. Also, this report says that in addition, more than 2 in 5 hiring managers say it's only going to get more difficult to find the skills they need. And Steve, this recent survey about it was 1,006 hiring executives within the technology engineering fields, and they said that they're all starting to feel a pinch of the skills gap. 80% of them actually agreed that there's a talent gap that is inhibiting their ability to fill other positions within their enterprises. And a lot of the skills that we've talked about here and the future of technology has been going, the skills they're looking for, they desperately need to include security, cloud skills, data, and also AI. And when asked by these hiring managers what skills will have a major impact for their firm in the next 5 years, no surprise, Steve, cybersecurity was top with 53%, followed by cloud storage, followed by data engineering, and then, of course, AI and computer vision was in fourth there. And Steve, this is kind of a growing concern because we have talked about several times how Apple and Google, outside of the big ones, even some of the entrepreneurial startups and venture capitalists that are being funded right now are really heavily investing in whatever app of choice or whatever social media platform that they're creating. And it seems to be everybody wants to hire engineers, everybody wants cybersecurity analysts, but the talent gap and the labor markets are not really supplying that right now. And to kind of further this point, they said that there is one side where you have to look at where the talent gap exists. And then also a lot of these corporations are having to take a look inside themselves to really sort of analyze and look at their own culture and those own practices so that they're actually not repelling talent. I think that's the other side of the coin here, Steve, is that some companies do have a bit of a flawed personnel strategy where, you know, it's maybe not just the top dollar per se, like we talked about with the tech salaries last episode, but it's more out of the box benefits than salaries. You know, the retirements, the health benefits, you know, a lot of those things, promotion, advancement, personal development, and professional development are a lot of what workers are looking for now. And Steve, it's a really interesting situation to be in where all we've talked about is what we're going to need is engineers and data scientists and cloud storage experts and cybersecurity analysts. And now the survey's coming out and saying, you know what, we may not be meeting those goals. And that's quite a quandary for the technology industry to be in right now.
This certainly is a very interesting topic. You know, we hear a lot about the tech world and engineering and some of the complexities and challenges that exist today. When I started in this field and started working my way through, the majority of us during those years were, I'll just say we were generalists. We knew how to take care of networks. We could write scripts. We could do SQL statements. We could do a little bit of security. We did kind of the hodgepodge of everything, and that was, in those days, quote, an IT person. As time has progressed, and certainly there's more and more of the business aspects that are electronically generated, manipulated, reported off of, and of course the securities of today make everything more complex in that you also then need more discriminatory personnel within those specified industries. I'm not sure that when somebody gets in this industry anymore that they really decide specifically what they're going to be. Am I going to be a security guy or whatever the case may be? I'm not sure what is taught in schools anymore, to be real honest with you. Of course, when I started IT, computers, computer science wasn't even college curriculum. However, for a vast majority of time, college education within this industry was only computer science, and computer science is basically programming, coding, those kinds of things. I know they have more stringent curriculum nowadays, but I'm not sure in the traditional college atmosphere, Dave, that they really have their hands around it versus maybe some very specific vocational components of colleges that get more into the meat and potatoes. But the other thing is just experience level. It's very hard to obtain experience within some of these industries without any prior working in those industries. It's really kind of a tough thing. The other thing I would say is I would hope that they would also educate and redistribute internally within an organization to better themselves as where they deem that the priority should be.
Yeah, I think there's a lot. It's one of those things, Steve, where I work in a field for my 8 to 5 here, where I work in waste management, I work in recycling, I work in trash, and you can't go to a school to learn anything about waste management. It's not something anybody ever really goes to school for. There's not a course you can take. There's not anything that's going to give you a foundation for what that work is. Vice versa, as compared to the technology industry, you're going to go specifically to get some of those skills. Right? You're going to get the technical chops, you're going to get the engineering background, you're going to get all the computer science you need. But in some respects, they can't really gain all those skills and those knowledge and all the technical chops without on-the-job training. So I think perhaps that is a little skewed with this survey in general, where, maybe these people that are getting hired just don't have that experience to demonstrate that they've got the technical chops, because it's very different in the classroom environment. It's different, if you're self-employed, whatever. But when you start getting into some of the larger tech firms here, some education and some technical experience on-the-job training is needed. And one thing that I found, Steve, that one of the best slides, and we'll have a link in the show notes here from the Technology and Engineering Survey, is they asked, in your field, which soft skill is most difficult to find in a candidate? And the 5 that were listed was teamwork and interpersonal skills, problem solving was number 2, critical observation was 3, communication skills was 4th, and adaptability was the 5th one. And Steve, those things aren't technical in nature as far as, education, experience. Those are soft skills that you're going to learn as an individual as you work in different environments with different teams. And certain individuals are going to have those different soft skills. And so I think this goes beyond just education, just through going through the schools and getting your degrees and on-the-job training. There's a lot more skills associated that may not fit the culture or sort of idea behind some of these tech startups or even some of the big tech firms. And we'll have a link in the show notes. It's a really good 33, PDF slide of, the value of training and what people are looking for. And there's a lot of different things going on here. And there's a lot of different things going on here. And, decision, is it college degree in a related field? Is it job history? Are they looking for any college degree? Is there any demonstration of skills like posting on GitHub, any work samples? And so, and you can get into a lot of the industry certifications. Are they looking for that? Are they looking for relevant coursework, with some accelerated learning providers? There's a lot that goes into it, and not all those things you're going to capture in the school or education, higher education at that. it's one of those things, Steve, where it's really truly a blend of what the company's looking for, what the employee is looking for, and sort of the background behind who they are and what they've been doing for the last number of years.
Yeah, I agree. I think for the majority of time's sake, there's been two buckets. There's been programs, software development, and network administration. And in between the two of those are vast challenges and skill sets that are required in between there, but also on the external. The outside of those two major categories are also the same kind of skills that are missing within components outside those infrastructures now. It's because we used to have it pretty mildly just one side or another. You didn't have all these business requirement components, security components, and all these things that have really led to, I think, a bottleneck when it comes to the personnel. I will tell you, when you talked about some of those traits, nobody take this wrong. I believe it's pretty true because I used to be one, is that most developers, most software guys don't have many of those interpersonal type skills. Those kind of people are the ones that want to be left alone in a dark closet and give them a computer screen and they'll hack out their work.
Yeah, I think you're right. And a lot of these things, Steve, are definitely a growing concern for a lot of these hiring managers across the entire spectrum. You know, it could be the largest firms to the smallest firms. And I think it's a multi-level problem, you know, an issue that needs to be addressed. But we'll have to see. You know, it always seems to be, you know, we're cranking out more IT specialists by the week, you know, and every year it seems like the graduates are ready and willing to work, and it doesn't sound like necessarily everybody's in line or prioritized with what they need coming out of university or even any sort of technical training. So yeah, it could be a problem brewing.
Well, it could be, and not just from the enterprise level, Dave, but I also have a customer right now that I'm working a lot of hours and trying to help out, but they actually need their own internal person to be able to take over some of these responsibilities. And it's been hard to find the right match to fit what they need. They don't need somebody perhaps load Windows on it. They need something more than that, but they don't need a full-fledged IT administration enterprise guru because they have a company that takes care of that. So it's kind of a middleman, and we're having trouble finding that middleman.
It's definitely a troubling trend. I think there's been a lot of reports lately that everything seems to be on the up and up. And there's these, if you go into this field, you're going to get a job, no questions asked. And I think we're starting to see some backtrack from that. Well, Steve, National Geographic is coming out with a very interesting series that just launched January 13th of this year called Valley of the Boom. This is, right now, there's 4 episodes. They're following the lives of some tech world figures, including their friendships, rivalries, victories, and failures. What can you tell us about this really cool show that's out?
I've actually been recording these episodes when I first discovered that Nat Geo was coming out with this. And, you know, periodically on this show, Dave, we like to talk about some of the barnstormers in the history of the technology we're involved with today. You know, the history, some of the interesting events, the people themselves. And this is an interesting series that pretty much takes care of itself within the Silicon Valley. And the last few shows, we've actually talked about various components about the Silicon Valley. Here are some great stories about in the beginning and through the .com boom, who were the key players, how did these things come about. It's very interesting. I did watch about half of the second episode, and it's about the incredible rise and power of Netscape. And they actually talked to founders, past CEOs of Netscape and things like that. And then when Microsoft finally figured out that they missed the train and come in and attack everybody and try and take it over and those kinds of things. And it's the stories with those within that are very interesting. I will say that there can be a few corny parts within these episodes. I'll just say that. But I'm taking it as context, historical information to better understand for myself what some of the trials were, some of the roadblocks that they had ahead of them. And it's very interesting. So certainly you can DVR these on your cable TV or satellite, or you also can, just go over to National Geographic and watch the episodes there. I'm not sure how many episodes they're going to have or how many seasons. It has just kicked off, but so far I have found it very good.
Yeah, I'm looking at this right now, Steve, in Valley of the Boom. You can find it obviously on any subscription cable package that you have, but it seems to be getting pretty good reviews. The story of, the tech world disruption, and it's sort of disrupting some, I want to say, probably some long-standing history of what actually happened during the rise of Netscape, and, and how they really dominated the browser market. And then, of course, as you get farther into the episodes, you start realizing how Microsoft retaliated and sort of the war between Netscape and Microsoft, and the whole story behind that. It's cool because if you go to nationalgeographic.com, just search for Valley of the Boom, you can see all these historical figures within the tech industry. I think there's one that looks like Mark Cuban is even featured in one of the episodes, and we know that he's a big time tech guy, started from nothing, created this mega tech company out there in Dallas, owner of I think a couple sports franchises here in the United States, and it's looking really interesting. And sadly I missed the first 2 episodes, so I'm gonna have to go back. But Salon.com actually has a really cool interview with Matthew Carnahan and Lamorne Morris, the creator and the star of this wild tale of the tech boom in the early 90s. So we'll have a link up there, or just head over to Salon.com and check that out. A lot of cool things happening, Steve. I love when technology hits the big screen. It reminds me of when we talked about Control-Alt-Deliver, I think is what the A&E show was, and that lasted for a couple seasons. Really cool to follow about, the startup of IBM and the like, and sort of what happens behind the scenes at tech companies, and that was cool. And I just love shows like this. Again, you're going to have some things that are corny, perhaps some things that aren't completely accurate, but at the same time, it's some good storytelling. I think that's what we're looking for.
I think it's very interesting in that they also bring out some things you probably don't know about. As, for example, they get into the Globe.com and how it was founded and built and became a megastar, which people don't know in the 1990s was the first social media platform. And also Michael Finney, who actually was a technology con artist, scraping a lot of money from people. I'm not going to give into what he was actually doing. You'll have to watch the show. But, if you're interested in technology history and kind of what has happened primarily within the Silicon Valley, it's worth checking out.
It is, because I think a lot of us get wrapped up in, of course, today's technology and in work and family life. And obviously that makes a lot of sense. But to go back and kind of see the founding and the history of how technology started, and really we thinking about like Apple and Google and Amazon having battles and wars. I mean, this was the start, right, Steve, in the early 90s of the tech rise and these tech conglomerates, and they were literally at war because there was only 2 players in the space. At the time, it kind of gets outshadowed because, okay, all right, you got some web browsers and some tech companies, blah, blah, blah. Now we see a lot of battles, but it wasn't anything like it was back then because it was raw, it was unfiltered. Everybody's competing for the space because they weren't sure how the space was going to evolve and change. And I think it gives you a lot of context into why things are the way they are in 2019. Well, Steve, let's jump on over to, of course, we talked about last week, but there's a lot of U.S. federal government websites that were shut down, a lot of FTC sites that involved like the National Do Not Call Registry. We had ftccomplaints.gov that was down and still currently down. I don't believe the United States federal government is open and operating in its full capacity. So this gentleman by the name of Zach Whitaker, you can find this link over at TechCrunch.com, got super geeked out, and he realized and he noticed that several federal websites, Steve, were throwing back browser errors because the TLS certificate, and of course we know that as the HTTPS, and either you saw the padlock that was not locked, or you saw the not secure, for example, on Safari and Chrome, and says your connection is not private, attackers may steal your information. And so what this individual did, Steve, was he went through and found all of the upcoming or expired HTTPS certificates and created an entire list of all the websites that the federal government has, and they're expiring. And it all comes down to the unfunding of the federal government. There are a couple websites that were on his list that he did a little bit more research and found out that those domains were auto-renewed certificates, which surprises me that a lot of these other ones weren't. But I guess if there's no funding mechanism in place, you can't auto-renew a lot of these. And Steve, these come down to a lot of different national laboratories. They come to the websites of some of the House and Senate majority leaders. They involve anything from the Federal Register to the National Flood Insurance Program. You have the Federal Aviation Administration that's set to expire, I think, on February 13th. And of course, everything from IRSsales.gov to auction sites to a redirect to the U.S. Treasury, the National Library of Medicine. The U.S. International Trade Commission website is out of compliance as of right now. And Steve, it's just a stark reality. Are there reasons to be concerned? Yes. Does it mean that every site you're going to visit, if it's up and operational, is going to extract every little bit of personal detail? No, it's not the case. But renewing certificates, as you know, Steve, doesn't take that much time or even effort. Sometimes just a click of a mouse, but it, of course, does cost money. And during a government shutdown, there just isn't any. And one of the interesting quotes I was able to pull up from Eric Mill, who is a security expert who actually recently left the government's digital agency called 18F, says that most of these federal agencies and departments are responsible, of course, for their own website. And he said that some of them auto-renew every 3 months, but from department to department and agency to agency, there is no integration in that. And so essentially each department is fending for themselves. There's very little oversight, very little consistency and continuity from one to the other. It is something, Steve, that raises more red flags. That is another concern for why the federal government is not funded and not operational. And again, TechCrunch.com has an extensive list of expiring in January, and those that are expiring in mid to late February as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's not only SSL certificates, but actual domains that are going to be expiring. And once they expire, if you don't catch them in time, they go back into the quote lottery, and anybody could buy them.
Can you imagine that?
Maybe I'm going to go for fishwatch.gov, maybe. It's important to understand what you said about each agency is responsible for their own independence with their various websites, because as I just did and went through various types of these, that the style of implementation has an effect. Let me backtrack 1 second with that statement. And a few times in 2018, Dave, we had discussions about web browser manufacturers changing how their browsers work in relationship to secured socket layers, HTTPS, and that the reversal was going to come true with updates, that the norm was going to be to thwart you off if a certificate was not validated. It used to be that you could go to it and you just wouldn't get the padlock and things like that. I found that depending on the implementation, some of these you can add security exceptions and still go read partial websites, and some of them totally just block you. So it's interesting in that they're all different. I would probably be more concerned about a domain expiring than I probably would a certificate. However, it's deeply troubling in that information that needs to be accessible to the public is not, because of these, to be honest with you, extremely cheap certificates. But it comes down to, like you said, Dave, if there's no funding mechanism for a $5 certificate, it's not going to work.
Absolutely. I think one important thing to bring up, Steve, and then we'll move on to our last topic, is that a lot of people, okay, why does it matter? Right? Above all else, it's an inconvenience, right? We can't access these federal government websites. We can't submit complaints. We can't look up whatever we need to. It's just a blank screen saying, sorry, check back tomorrow. But also, depending on how long this shutdown actually lasts, it won't take long for some of those bigger federal sites that we mentioned at the onset of this discussion, that they might start throwing errors and locking users out. That's a possibility. But the one thing, Steve, I did want to bring up, it's because I have some experience with this at my 8 to 5, is that I use a lot of different databases for information from third parties, from other apps or other developers. So when you think of when federal sites are not uploading data or data is not accessible, you're going to start seeing an effect on those third-party sites and apps that really rely on that, such as through a developer API. And the problem is that there are projects that, just because the federal government isn't up and running right now, there's a lot of other consultants and other agencies that utilize that data from the federal sites. And none of these applications, these databases that we pay for, are being updated. And so therefore, we're getting put behind. These developers are being put behind. They're going to be questioned, of course, for, we're paying for a service that we are not getting any real-time recent data on. It matters for a lot of different reasons: security, for access, for consumer information, inconvenience. There's a lot of reasons. So I just want to bring that up. I think that's one thing that people don't really think about. And the only reason I would have thought of it, Steve, is because I work in an industry where I utilize a lot of state and federal data. And when there's no money, there's no access. All the applications we use are in a sense stalled out for a long time.
Yeah, let's also don't forget that even if the government opened today, doesn't mean those sites are going to be back up today. Somebody in the technology field is going to have to get everything re-registered, reprocessed, recoded, and it's still going to take a while to reestablish these sites even once the government comes back to life.
Steve, I'm just blown away at the breadth of some of these websites. And, we know every federal government is a large institution. There are just so many branches and so many things that the federal government has to take care of, from Native American affairs to Treasury to medicine to even the FBI's malware analysis site is down. Department of Veteran Affairs is going to be expiring. Sharing America's Code, code.gov is, set to expire. And you kind of forget the depth in which the federal government has its arms into. And when you think of the technological impact of a shutdown like that, it's a little breathtaking, to be honest.
Well, it really is. And, right now, all we can do is hope that a solution comes swiftly. Doesn't appear that way, but all we can do as citizens is to put out our thoughts about this, and hopefully we get things rolling again, because if it rolls too much longer, there's really going to be some devastating effects.
Yeah, I think you're right. It will become much more inconvenient and a lot more costly and a lot more scary down the road. And that's not to frighten you. It's just a matter of the reality in which we live in, where everything's accessible online and everything we do is, hey, just Google it and we'll find it. And that's just the business and enterprise that we live in now. So, Steve, I did want to finish out the show with a bit of a nervy moment that my wife and I had this afternoon. We're sitting there. I'm looking at our website, we're doing different things, and my wife's like, "Hey, Dave, can you come over and help me try and find a folder? It seems to have gone missing in my Google Drive. That's unusual. I've never had a document that's just vanished or a folder that has just left." So she's like, "Yeah, here, check out my computer, search for this term." And I'm looking, and she's had this folder, Steve, for the last 3 years. She's a lecturer and faculty supervisor at one of the universities here in town, and it's a class that she's beginning to teach on Friday. And she was just going to go over all of her presentations, her syllabus, and a wide variety of things, assignments, and she cannot find this folder anywhere, Steve. It has completely vanished. It wasn't relocated into one of her older folders. It wasn't archived. It wasn't in the trash. It wasn't mislabeled. Steve, it was the folder itself had completely vanished from her Google Drive. Now, if you search for the certain class number, you can find about 80% of her assignments, of her presentations. And so we were freaking out, right? Because she needs that other 20%. And so we came up with this idea of, okay, a lot of these Google presentations and things on Google Drive, you share out with a number of people. And so I had this idea of, okay, why don't you message or email your last 3 cohorts of students that you've had to see if by chance any of them have downloaded your presentations that you were missing. She was looking for 4 in particular. And sure enough, Steve, after maybe 20 minutes back and forth, she had all of her 4 presentations resaved into her drive. But Steve, the only reason I wanted to bring this story up is, one, it was completely stressful, all right? We're starting class in a week, and she's got to prep, and all of a sudden she has to worry about creating 4 new presentations, which she has worked on for the last 3 years to really hone in and clarify everything on these presentations, from assignments to pictures to links to exercises in the classroom. And all of a sudden the folder is completely gone. So, one, make sure frequently that we are going to be downloading our Google Drive as a backup somewhere on another computer. 2, that not everything that's always saved, quote unquote, in the cloud is necessarily always safe and available. Like this has happened before to one of our colleagues, and there's no real explanation for it. It just has gone missing and they can't find it. And some of the links she has that say, okay, this presentation actually doesn't exist anymore, which is really bizarre because she hasn't done anything. So a little bit of lesson learned, Steve, when it comes to some of the Google Drive, some of the things that we store in the cloud, in whatever backup or cloud storage platform you're using, always good to have more of a local backup somewhere else. And make sure what we learned, Steve, is being able to use the resources we had at our disposal to get that information back. And of course, after a couple hours of messaging and stuff, we were able to, our nerves were calm, everything's up to date, the folder's recreated, but just a bit of a scary moment when it comes to something you need and you need immediately has vanished. It's never easy to look at that and be like, oh my God, I have to start from scratch. Luckily, we didn't have to.
I've had also those wet britches moments when something terribly has gone awry. You know, my hat's off to you because I wouldn't have thought of doing what you guys did by going and recollecting some of those shared links to obtain a lot of the information back. You know, fortunately, you were able to get it back. Unfortunately, as we are human, we think things are always safe and secure and is always going to be there, and they're not. No matter who the host is, whether it's Google or Microsoft or IBM or whatever the case may be. And it's always a lesson in backing up because you never know what's going to go on. And certainly, of course, if it's a free account, you know what you get for free. You get not much. You don't get support. You don't get diddly squat. So I'm glad it's worked out. I'm sure there are scrambles of backups being delivered now to your local hard drive. I'm glad because I wouldn't want to be the one in her vicinity if that was not recoverable.
Well, yeah, I mean, you work on these presentations and you take pride in what you do, right? And you have 3 years of enhancing and building off your last class assessment and feedback and what you've learned professionally and within the classroom. And you're always trying to reinvent or at least, reinforce the information that's on your presentations. And to lose that is just so heartbreaking. And yes, it would have been to the grind, every night coming home after work, working on these presentations. And it's a very unsettling feeling to be like, okay, this was here like 3 months ago. Now it's completely gone. And to your point, Steve, it's when it comes to free services, yes, a lot of, for example, Google, relatively secure. You don't lose out on a lot of stuff. It's usually recoverable in some form or fashion if you've done things right. But again, there's not a phone number you can call to get Google support, right? You're trying to search online, you're texting your friends trying to figure out, hey, is this possible? Can I get this? But you're not going to have a phone number like customer support for Google to say, hey, I can't find my folder. Is there anything you can help me with? And they can work you through. That just doesn't exist for a company of Google's size. So, we kind of hashed through our options, try to figure out what we could do. And I came up with that idea. And luckily, a lot of students love to have their presentations. They can refer back to them when it comes time for them to be in a classroom. And I've been called on that a couple times. Steve is like, hey, I cannot find this PDF or this report or this study. Do you have it? I'm like, absolutely, I have it right here. And it comes in handy. So kind of a nervy moment for us in the Lee household. But I'm glad Anea had found her information and things are a little bit smoother and calmer in the Lee household as of right now.
Yeah, you'll probably get dinner tonight instead of egg on your face. It's unnerving. I've been through that too with various things and in fact have lost things. And we always have to be conscious of it. I'd sure be interested to understand why this happened. And, oh, by the way, in a month, does it for some reason just pop up again? I've had that happen too when it comes to cloud services, that something wonky was going on and a few weeks later, poof, there it is. So I don't know, Dave.
Yeah, wonky things happen all the time, right? Yeah, it's the wonky waves of tech. That'll be our new podcast name. What do you think about that? Because it is.
If I can figure out how to spell it.
Oh, yeah, just, in tech, you just take out the vowels from everything. So if you don't really know how to spell it, just just put a couple letters, take out the vowels, and that's your new company name.
iWonk.
iWonky. IWNK. I like that.
We're in there.
Yeah.
We got a new name.
Well, Steve, I think that's going to wrap up episode 430. Any parting words?
All I would say is that we sure get a kick out of talking about these various topics every week, and we hope that you'll get enthusiastic with us and jump in on social media or send us a note from the website and say, hey, I liked what you talk about and I agree, or you guys are really off your rocker and here's my point of view. As long as you state your opinion in decent, non-threatening vocabulary, we'll be just fine.
Decent, non-threatening language. I like that. If that's words to live by, I think. And Steve, I think probably next week we'll have a pretty cool announcement with a few things that we're working on our side of the podcast on the Waves of Tech. So look forward to that on episode 431. Thank you, everybody, for subscribing to our show. And if you just happened upon our website, modernlife.network, or even happened upon us through a podcast app, go ahead and hit that subscribe button if you haven't done so. We would appreciate it. So the Waves of Tech is powered by modernlife.network. Thanks for tuning in, and don't forget to keep on teching.